So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this NCSR webinar with the RBOC project. We'll be hearing today from Joe, who's going to be talking to us about mental health and supporting volunteers in times of disruption. So just a reminder that the webinar is being recorded. You'll be able to watch back at it later if you wish, because we'll be putting it on YouTube. And so it's great to be welcoming you all to this event today. So you'll notice that I'm not Andrew. Andrew is on leave, although he is sitting in the background. My name's Duncan Shaw. I work at the University of Manchester, and I'll be running this session as well. I'll be moderating the Q&A. Your microphones, your cameras are currently switched off, but you can contribute questions. You can use the chat function, and during the Q&A, we'll allow people to come off mute, ask their questions. So please use the chat function, please use hands raised function, and we'll be able to have a conversation with Joe about the topic of today's webinar. So Joe Dover, we chatted with Joe a few weeks ago and realised that Joe has so much to say that we needed to give her a whole slot. So whilst we normally have two presenters in these slots, today it will just be Joe talking about the health, resilience, well-being aspects of disasters. So these topics, I should say that this is the fourth webinar in a series of 4. And the other topics have been around attracting and retaining volunteers, flooding, respecting animals and respecting cultures. And these 4 topics emerged from conversations that we had with community groups back in November, December of last year, where they indicated that there was a number of topics that they wanted to cover. And this topic, supporting the well-being of volunteers, was really at the top of that list. So we're delighted to be able to bring this webinar to you. Without really much more of an introduction, Joe Dover is going to chat with us. I'm going to be bringing a whole range of different experiences about how do we keep ourselves, how do we support ourselves, how do we support others, and how do we engage with volunteers around well-being. And so, Joe, I'm delighted that you're able to come and share some information with us. As I've said, that we will make this webinar available on YouTube after the session. So everything's being recorded, including the Q&A part of this. Joe, I wonder if you're able to activate your screen sharing, and let's just make sure that's going to work. And whilst Joe get that sorted out, I wonder if I could just remind you to please do use the chat. It makes it so much easier for us if we've got a range of comments there that we know that we can draw down on during the chat portion of this. Joe, I can see your slides. I wonder if we can just test audio.
Right, hopefully that works.
Great, yeah, we can hear you. Welcome to the to NCSR webinar. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm really honoured and quite excited to be here because this is a huge topic that I'm very passionate about, experienced with, and always wanting to learn from others, as well as share some of the things that I've learned as well. So if it's okay, I'll start just by introducing myself a little. Actually, I did look through the participants as you were all coming in, and there are a couple of people I recognise from a few years ago that I used to work with. So hopefully they'll recognise some of what I'm sharing. But my name's Jo. I have been working for the last 27 years, which I can't believe it's 27 years, with people affected by war, conflict and terrorism. I started out working with people affected by the Northern Ireland Troubles that lived in Britain. And as that time went on, for many of those people, it was years already since their incidents, and they'd primarily had some help, but not very much. And some of that was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And so we've learned a lot about that, and we've become a lot better at critical incident response. Lots and lots of things have changed over the decades, actually, that I've been in this field. And one of the key things that I've been working with predominantly in that time is related to people affected by acts of terrorism. So not just in the UK, even though this is where I'm from, and the majority of the incidents I've worked with are people who've been in bombings, shootings, car attacks, etc., right up to the most recent ones in Manchester and London. I'm working still with the community affected by 7/7, the 7th of July London bombings, which on Monday will be 20 years since that happened, and I'll be involved in the commemoration for that next week. So I've got really a long-term view on this. So from the beginning stages, and I've worked with a lot of people in emergency response, with critical incidents and other disasters, because one of the first things, which I'll show you in a moment, that I learned was that there are really common needs of people. And not only are the needs common across those who are affected, we as responders can be impacted because we're also people, we're also human beings. So what I'd like to do with you today is I put learning outcomes because I'm a trainer by nature, but really it's not a training session. It's really to give you an insight into the content of what we'll talk about today. So I'm going to start with looking at the needs of people affected by critical incidents and just place that, because I do have mostly specific details about sort of big terror attacks, wars and conflicts, but it can be related to other kinds of emergencies, disasters, and critical incidents that affect individuals, not just major casualty ones. So I'm just going to start with a little bit about that, just to give you some insights into some of the things that I think are not so common for us to look at, but also because the biggest focus really for me in this, in next however many minutes we carry on for, is what's the impact really on us supporting people during and following critical incidents. And just to start with that personal thing, I am still working with the community 20 years afterwards. I still, there's some documentaries on at the moment. One's out today, one was out at the weekend, one was out in January. And it has an impact even still now on me, because I know the people, I know the realities, I know the stories. And so there's things that I think are really important for us to take care of. And in some of my work, it's been as a professional. I'm not a therapist. I'm a non-clinician. I've primarily been giving psychosocial support to people in the immediate, medium and long term, more in the long term these days. And I've done that in a voluntary capacity as well. And I do know that in many different systems, it's a mix of professionals, seasoned professionals who do this for a living every day, who respond to major incidents, who've got lots of experience of it, and lots of people who are volunteers who might be called upon at different times. In my last 10, 15 years, I've been working much more internationally. So I've been working, I'm still working with 2 different UN entities, and I've been looking at protocols and processes for people preparing before, during and after major incidents, particularly terrorism. But looking at countries like Pakistan and Nigeria, I've been working with recently, and how can they use their systems, their emergency and civil defence systems, to respond to terror attacks, which is the area I work in. But knowing that these things, even in countries where it's much more common than in the UK, there's still not a huge amount of resource. So we have to work across different things. So we'll look at the needs of people, we'll look at the impact on us, And hopefully we'll have a little bit of time towards the end of it to look at what can we do ourselves. And of course, that doesn't mean our organisations don't have responsibilities, but we'll look at both of those things and try to have a bit of fun with that if you're willing anyway. So the thing I want to show you first, and I think a couple of people in the room actually will have seen this before, back in 2003, I did a huge piece of research when I was looking at people affected by the Northern Ireland troubles, but people in Britain. I was aware we were talking about a really small population of people who were not just in one community or one geographical space. They were all over the country. Some of those people had had their attacks and the incidents had been 20 or 30 years ago, and the most recent were 3 or 4 years ago. So we were already some time from the emergency phase and the critical incident response that would have been there. And one of the things we were trying to do was understand, so what did happen for people? What sorts of things did they have? What have been their needs in the medium and long term? What do they need now? And in order to verify part of that research, one of the things that we did actually in around late 2003 was to create a sounding board. And we talked to different organisations, government institutions, nationally and local government, with trauma organisations, with responding organisations like the British Red Cross, with the Royal British Legion, who'd worked long term with the military population. And we shared with them our findings, and it was a 250-page report. And I knew, no matter how much work we put into these things, how much effort the people who shared their stories with us, it's not the sort of thing that people are going to pick up and just read and absorb everything. So I made an attempt to try to put this all on one page, which is what you see before me. And I'm more than happy to share when I've stopped talking, but in the chat or through the consortium later, this document, because I've got some, I could go into lots of detail about all of this and spend the whole hour and a half at least talking about this. But really, this was an attempt to say, okay, what is it that we do know? And the headings on the left-hand side were the headings from the report that we did about people in Britain affected by the Troubles. But because we had the sounding board of other organisations working with much wider incidents than just terrorism, so other kinds of disasters, natural, man-made, flooding, we actually, during the time just after this, where we created the Critical Incident Response Advisory Group, was just post the 2004 tsunami. And so what we did was gather, looking at what we provided, what we found out, and trying to have some kind of comparative with other kinds of incidents and what was the impact on people. So really, this was trying to distill it and then get the other organisations and entities to have a look at it as well and say, do we think this is something that could help us in that? What are the sorts of things that we could expect might happen, or the sorts of things people have reported to us in the first few weeks? And so we decided to actually call the immediate term at the time in the first 8 weeks, because this is typically the time when there's so much attention, all of the different services and agencies. It's when clear up is happening, etc., etc. So this is when the majority of the response is there. The medium term we called 2 to 18 months, because this is still potentially, depending on what has happened, the kinds of things that are going on that we might need to pay attention to. And it's where we start to see things like inquests, if there have been deaths, inquiries, criminal justice investigations and processes starting, if it's a crime, all of those kinds of things. And then even back then in 2003, 2004, and then 2005, when we actually created this group, we recognized that broadly, and it's very, probably very subjective depending on the incident, but when you come to sort of 18 months after an event, that's a time where a lot of that support, a lot of those organisations, a lot of the roles have finished at that point. Perhaps some of the support has changed and the support needs might have changed. So we kind of talked about it being 18 months onwards. So there's lots in here, and I'm not going to talk to all of it because I'd like to get to looking at us in responding to this. But this is really an attempt to have a picture of the kinds of things that we might have to deal with. Now, some of these might be self-explanatory. Some of these might be obvious and you'll know about it, but people need information and communication. So we need to look at what is that and how that happens at the beginning. But what happens within those first 18 months? How do we keep up to date with people? How do we manage databases? And especially now, trying to keep in touch with people over the long period of time, and what happens later. And so an example, the 20th anniversary of London, we do not have a comprehensive database owned by one organisation to be able to contact everybody to invite them to the ceremony, as an example. So there's these kind of things, looking at it from different stages. Some of this, as I said, probably would be obvious, but just a couple to highlight about some of the things like injuries, both physical and psychological injuries that happen. They don't show up in the beginning stages. It's common, for example, with blast injuries, for things to happen many, many years later. For people to still be finding pieces of glass or pieces of shrapnel or a new injury arising from something that happened a long time ago. So these injuries can be there for a long time. And of course, we'll know that's also the case. We might see delays in psychological reactions. We might see delays in access to services, which makes things much more complex and difficult. We also see some of those financial and practical things. So people's ability to work, what they might need at the beginning. And we've got much better at the beginning stages of that. But later on, when those things show up, maybe we don't have some of those structures in place. A couple of things I really would like to just draw your attention to think about when responding to emergencies of any kind is context is one of the things that's really important. So the context is all important in terms of whether it, what the nature of the event was. So if it's flooding, it's in your community, it can be the loss of your house. It's obviously going to have some traumatic elements. If it was an intentional event, such as an act of terrorism, that's going to have some implications and bring up some needs for those affected. It might be because of where it happened, if it's people who are abroad who need to get home, or families that need to get out to where whatever has happened, etc., etc. And there'll be all sorts that come with that, including language, whether interpretation's needed, access to justice at a much later stage, all of those different kinds of things. Another part that I found as a practitioner that's been really important for people is recognition and acknowledgement. So being heard, being recognised about the impact, and in some cases, in many disasters, I've seen this over a long term. People are often leading to things like needing to campaign for change, and part of that is connected to recognition of what happened. And we often see, and I certainly can say this for terror attacks, a lot of attention, a lot of promises, and in the reality over the long period of time, we might not see some of those things coming to fruition. And in fact, they might be that the recommendations from a report don't get acted on, and then some of the same things happen again, which is not only problematic for the next people, but also for those who experienced it the first time and we knew that we learned lessons. So there's lots of different elements of that. And that recognition and acknowledgement can take many, many forms. But the more public the event, the more political the event, I would argue, some of that attention is high. And I think the general public would probably think that everything is done. We do know a lot. We do a lot. We're probably never going to be able to get the response exactly right in anything, partly because everyone's an individual and has different expectations and needs, but also we're not superheroes. We can do a great deal, and the importance is to try and take that on board and try to learn and try to encompass those lessons. A final one I just want to highlight very briefly, because I do think there are certain circumstances where we have quite a stoic approach, and it's not just in the UK. I've seen this in countries that I've worked with, like in Indonesia, for example, that some of these things might become, if they're very common, like terror attacks or like it during war and conflict, it becomes something that's you get hysterical about, because you just think, well, that's how life is now. We learn to adapt to those situations. And so some of the things that might come up might be covered because people don't actually think it's important to deal with because they've got used to it. But it also might be that some people start to mask things that they actually need, because we have a big focus on resilience and being resilient. But it can actually make that harder for people to then ask for help, especially in the longer term, when to some extent you're expected to get over it. So I'm going to leave that one there for the moment, and I'm sure we could talk loads more about this today. But what I would really like to move on to, and as I said, I'll make sure this is available, is just to really look at the impact of incidents. So this one is taken from a piece of work I've been doing with Victim Support Europe about terrorism in particular, but I think it's a good sort of way to think about the ripple effects of critical incidents. So those who are present during whatever the incident is, and here it says attack. So there's an individual level, there's a micro level, which is then that individual who were present during the event, and some of them might be deceased, their family and loved ones, but also the survivors, the people who survive whatever it is that's happened. They're part of this ripple effect. The first responders and witnesses might be us as volunteers, that we're volunteering to help in that situation. We're not necessarily, first responders are often conflated with emergency responders, and to some extent that might be the case. It might be the emergency services who are responding, or trained personnel, but it might also be members of the public who are there, who run to help, who are there, who witness what happened, who are caught up in it as well. And then just that macro level is really thinking about where an incident happens, there's an impact on the local community that it happened in and a wider population around that. So in the case of terrorism, for example, there's an impact on the society, and people start talking about things like solidarity, or want to do things to help. Or the wider population might be from a certain background, who all want to help people from those backgrounds. We see that in lots of big impacts. And the point I just want to make in this slide, in bringing it in, is we're in that third circle. Those of us, not just who are the ones on the scene, but those who are there in those first few weeks and months, perhaps those who are doing the recovery efforts, the clear up efforts, the things that we might witness and see ourselves in those periods of time, and perhaps those who we might work with a bit longer term as well, if that's our role. So I thought I'd just try to be, well, I think when you volunteer for these kinds of things, or you work in a support arena, we have to be a lot of things to a lot of people. And I think it's one of the things that makes us really valuable in the situations that we go into to help people. So we want to be able to be good listeners. We want to be able to, we need to have some strengths. We need to have a big heart so that we can help and we can care. We need to be that solid presence for somebody when they're in dire need and they need our help. So there's a lot that we need to be for others. Some of it is what they expect from us. Some of it is what our organisation that we're volunteering with or that we work for will be expecting us to be, all of these things to everybody. And I would argue that for a lot of us, this is some of our own expectations, that we are kind of the superhero, that we've got this cape, we've got the bag, we can do all of these things because we care, because we're trained, because we're experienced, because that's part of who we are. I would probably go as far to say that most of us are not in this for money, because there's no point in saying that we would be, because it's not really an area of work, you know, in the helping profession that's necessarily one that is well paid anyway, and especially if we're volunteering, it's because we care, because we want to make a difference. So I think I just wanted to sort of, you know, put that out there, because I think it's important when we then look at what's the impact on people who have some of those characteristics. Perhaps when you look at it, you don't see all of those. Perhaps there's others that aren't on here. But I just really wanted to share that we have a lot on our plates, and we can do a lot. And even just these big ears, huge ears to listen carefully, if that's all you do for some of the people that you help, that you listen to them, that can be absolutely transformational. That might be all your role is. And I think there's a tension that comes with that too, because as helpers, as volunteers or staff, we're in a helping capacity that somehow, because we're good at this, because we're trained, we're experienced, that there can still be a bit of stigma about if you need some help, or that you worry that somebody might not ask you to volunteer again if you've had an impact from something. So because they might not see you as resilient, or you might be weak in some way. I do think it's changing, but I do think it's something that we in the helping professions, in all the various ways in which we're there, whether it's volunteers or staff or therapists or police or emergency planners, we feel like we need to be on top of everything, but it's very human for us to have an impact. And I think that's important for us to recognize that, know that it's possible. And what I'd like to do now is just go through some of the things that could be risks to us. And they're risks because we're human beings. So the first one, which you may have come across, secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. It's also related to compassion fatigue, which I'll talk about in a moment. But this is something that is very common and very likely when you have a prolonged exposure to the trauma of others. So it can come in lots and lots of different ways. It can affect anybody. It can come from short, sharp, intense periods and long periods where you might do this for many, many times. So it includes witnessing something yourself, witnessing what somebody is telling you, listening to their stories, particularly of adversity, providing support in those difficult moments for people. But you also might be providing that support in a live situation yourself. If you're there responding, you might be seeing all sorts of things around it. So you are also experiencing it as well as the person you're trying to help. Some of the ways in which we might notice that could happen, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, you might find, well, I won't read them all out because they're there and you will get the slides afterwards as well. But there might be things that come up in the moment, in the short term, in the medium term, and possibly in the longer term. And I'll go through these a bit more in a moment, because I think there's some things in here that are just important for us to recognize. So really, none of us are immune from this. Some of us are more, there's more of a risk because of some of our own characteristics, but also it's to recognize that we all have different things happening at different times in our life. So the emergencies and disasters that we respond to don't happen when we're planning for it. They happen often when something else is going on. So perhaps we've got something happening in our own family. Perhaps we're having a difficult time at work. Perhaps there's a relationship issue that we're experiencing. Perhaps we've just had a bereavement. These things are part of our response, and we need to be mindful that it doesn't mean we can't respond, but we need to be mindful that increases the likelihood of impact and exposure to that vicarious trauma. I just want to highlight a little one that isn't as perhaps well known, because I know that there's many of you who I understand are coming into this. Some of you may be it's a very rare occurrence that you will be exposed to some of these things. But for others, perhaps you will experience several times when you're exposed to these kinds of traumas, these kind of high intensity incidents. So if you're a welfare worker, if you're an emergency responder, a planner, a health professional, anyone who's really in that helping capacity, it can be really common for people to develop what is known as compassion fatigue. And this is the gradual lessening of compassion over time based on the amount of time you've been exposed to things. So it's partly a protection mechanism. And it's not to say that, you know, if you manage to handle things well, you have compassion fatigue, but this is at a point where you really don't care anymore. Or that you get just so frustrated because people are just not listening and just not doing what you ask, and you're losing the part of the very thing that makes you the person who's good to respond in those emergency situations. So this is something that was discovered in the 1950s, first diagnosed in nurses, and particularly in intensive care wards where there's a lot of death, a lot of trauma. But it's been a growing area, and it's really about knowing that there's a cost for us in caring, that at some point it could be that we become numb to that the very thing that drew us to help becomes something that actually means that we're probably not the best people to be the responding people. And it's something I've seen in some of the work that I've done, that people have actually left their professions because of this, because they just don't want to or can't cope with this kind of exposure any further. And that's difficult, because thinking back to that sort of funny slide about why we get involved and what we, you know, is a big part of why we do something, because we want to help, that if we find that we lose the ability to do that, that's really impactful, because part of this is, it can be really difficult because we thought we were a good person. We can be quite hard on ourselves with these things. So it's just something to look out for. And just to say, one of the things I will do in the follow-up from this is I will send you some links to go and look and read more about this. So it's really just an introduction, because we're just doing a fairly short thing here. I say that and I realise I've just looked at the time. So I'm going to crack on so that we actually give you time to respond as well. So this is really just some things to look out for that cross over between both vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. And this is really so that we can start noticing where it might be impacting us. So if we see in our own behavior, in our own thoughts and feelings, that we might start to be impacted by these, and it could be any of these: feeling more hopeless and helpless, constant stress and anxiety, sleeplessness, nightmares, being negative all the time. And what we're good at as helpers is seeing that in other people and less so in ourselves. But it goes back to the point I made at the beginning. We are human beings too, and this is like a secondary effect. So that very thing that we're looking for in the people we're there to help, in whichever role that is, can have that impact on us. And we're not always the first to see that. So it might be that it develops over time, and then you start to notice it, and then you start to realize, there's something going on here a bit more. We are going to talk about what we can do about that in a little while, so bear with me. So things that this can have an impact on in our professional lives and personal lives is not being able to focus, feeling incompetent or having self-doubt, decrease in productivity, which obviously will be an issue in our workplaces. But those kinds of impacts affect our relationships, affect our friendships, affect our work. Our work might have an impact on somebody needing to take time off, or being at work and overworking and not being productive. And again, those things, given that sort of expectation we have of ourselves as the professionals or volunteers that we are, to be able to do all those things, when we start not being able to do those, that can have an impact too, and that can cause all sorts of issues for us. So the other thing I just want to highlight is there are also some risk factors. Now, if you're any of these attributes, doesn't mean you are absolutely going to be traumatized by the work. It just means you're more likely, or there's more of a risk factor. We're going to look at some protective factors in a little while. But I think some of these things, if you think about that image at the beginning, being overly conscientious, we want to make sure we're doing everything well. We're doing everything well to make sure those people are safe. We're giving of ourselves. Perhaps we want to get it done right. Maybe we don't have, because we're working hard, maybe we don't have some of the priorities about making sure we've got good social support, or maybe we've got some high levels of stress in our personal life. Maybe we've got our own experiences from the past that have actually led to us having difficult or negative coping skills. So if we've got any of those attributes, that's something to be mindful of and aware of, because it makes the likelihood of vicarious trauma, of compassion fatigue, much more likely. It doesn't mean it will happen, but these are things for us to know about ourselves. And a lot of this is about self-awareness. Sometimes it can also be organisationally. So stressful events that happen frequently, I've put on here, deaths in an intensive care unit. You might expect it in some jobs, in some professions. You don't always expect it in humanitarian organisations. I've worked in the UN for the last 7 years. In fact, today I just saw it. It was like my anniversary today. I started my contract in 2018. And I think I went in thinking, wow, this is amazing. I'm working at the UN. I've got all these principles, all these beliefs about it. And it's still just an organisation. It's still made up of people who go there for different reasons, have different ways of doing things. Not all of them are easy. There's, bureaucracies in every organisation. The UN has a lot. But there are stresses and strains that happen in organisations. There are people who, how they operate and the pressures that they're under. This is the same for big organisations, small organisations. There are stresses and pressures and funding and all those different things that make it harder. And one of the things that is common is that we don't always take care of our people, especially if their job is to look after others. We're focused on the end game, the beneficiaries more perhaps than our staff. Now, I'm not saying that all organisations are like that or the whole of the UN is like that, but it isn't uncommon. And it might be that there's a lack of awareness of what those risks are that we're talking about now. So just for a moment, and this is for you to think about, and you're welcome to put answers in the chat. So if you experienced vicarious trauma in your role as a volunteer, as a professional, what would be the implications for you? How would that sit and with you? What would that be like? Maybe it might make you doubt yourself or why you're doing the work that you're doing. It might have an impact on your relationships. But also, if you were experiencing vicarious trauma or perhaps compassion fatigue, what impact would that have for your organisation? Would you be as productive? Would you be able to do as well? Might there be difficulties based on how you react in a situation? And what about your beneficiaries? So those people who you're there to help. So there's lots of impacts, and I think we would, again, as helpers, probably be able to say, oh yes, this would happen for my organisation. They wouldn't be very happy about it. There would be this, there would be that. And for the beneficiaries, we don't want to let them down. I put you first because we're not so good at putting ourselves first. But you can't do it unless you are looking after yourself. So I just want to, give me 1 second, check where I'm up to. Oh yeah, there's a nice image. And this is one I hope you'll recognise. I know it's one that we talk about a lot, looking after yourself before attending to the needs of others. Not an easy thing to do if you're the helping kind. We don't always feel like that's our natural go-to because we might be more outward focused, but actually we do. It's really important that we attend to ourselves. So how do we recognize in ourselves? I'm going to talk a little bit about self-care for the next part. And I just want to highlight that this does not mean that only you are responsible for looking after yourself. But I want us to recognize that we should. And we have a duty to ourselves to do that. Because everybody's from different organizations, there are going to be completely different things that you have in place that your organization can and should be and hopefully is doing. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But I want just for us to think about in our helping roles, you know, for me, when I'm working with terrorism, it's such a big event. It's so intense, it's so all encompassing that actually it makes other things feel quite minimal in comparison. So perhaps at the time, my focus and attention will be on the thing I'm dealing with. And perhaps some of the things that might impact me generally get put to the side. And the likelihood is they'll pop up again later. But we're trying to be as professional, as helpful as possible, and we will focus on the other people. But if we don't look after ourselves, we might run out of that oxygen. And then we become a casualty ourselves. So it's the first rule of first aid, isn't it? Don't become a casualty. Okay. So thinking about some of those signs that we talked about earlier of vicarious trauma, but maybe more subtle than that. It might be that we are having trouble sleeping. That can be for a variety of reasons. Of course, there are health conditions, etc. But these really, when you look at these, I'd encourage you to think about if they're different to usual. So, you know, all of us have different sleeping abilities, I'll call it. You know, for some people, they can survive on 5 hours a night. I am absolutely envious of that. If they are, if I don't get 8 hours every night, it's a problem for me. So if 5 hours is normal for you, then it's less. Then you're having trouble sleeping or it's interrupted. If you're a person who has 8 and you're only sleeping for 5, then it's less. Those kinds of things. Overworking, again, I think in the helping professions, we might have that tendency, but it's anything that's more than usual. If we're starting to socially isolate, if we're being more emotional, perhaps crying more often, or becoming more frustrated or argumentative, maybe we're drinking or smoking more, maybe we're avoiding certain people that we're working with, or we become overly involved and lose our boundaries. Perhaps it's about experiencing an intrusive, unpleasant image that pops into your mind when you're doing something completely unrelated. Those are some of the things that we can look out for in ourselves. And that's something we need to become more familiar with. Is this different to my usual? And if so, it might be that I need to do something about it. Now, of course, there's a point at which some of this might need some professional help, but there are some things that you can do. So this is where I'm going to invite you to, and there's no judgment on this. It can be absolutely anything. I'm going to invite you to, for yourself, try to write a list for you, just for you, not something you have to share, of 10 things that you do that make you feel good or give you some energy or give you some kind of boost or might help you to relax or chill. And I'm going to challenge you to try and think of 10, and I'll tell you why afterwards. If you want, and only if you want, feel free to put some of those in the chat, because sometimes if you share that and say, I love gardening, or I love ironing, or I love spending time with my dog, or spending time with my friends or family or loved ones. I like being out in the sunshine. I like being at a beach. I like going for a massage. Any of those things, feel free. And I totally invite you to put those in the chat, because as other people read them, they might go, oh yeah, I quite like reading a book. I didn't put that on my list. So if any of you are struggling to find 10 things, yeah, if anyone wants to share those in the chat, great. give each other some inspiration and some ideas. I'd also like you to invite you to think about, and there doesn't have to be 10 for this one, but are there things in your work context? So whatever that is, if you are going to be responding to an incident, what are some of the things that you know are there that could help you? And perhaps that's a colleague that you know you've got someone that you've got a good connection with and you could offload to afterwards. Perhaps it's a more formal system. Maybe it's employee assistance. What does your organization do? What are some of the systems they've got in place? And it doesn't mean that you actually take them up on it. Perhaps they're just things that you know are there. If you needed it, you could use that. Doesn't mean you've had to use it. So the first one, the 10 things, is about you as an individual. What are the things you love to do? What are the things that bring you strength and joy and energy that are really nourishing for you? And then are there some things that you can identify, whether or not you use them in your work context? So I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat and see, because I've seen that there are some, oh, hang on. Okay. That didn't work. There we go. That's what I'm trying to find. Oh, brilliant. There's a few things here. Live music. Yep, with you on that one. Walking dog, massage, yoga, all sorts of different things. So feel free, add whatever you like. Thank you for doing that. And if any of you see those things and go, yeah, me too, write it on your list, because sometimes it's hard to get 10 things written down. Okay, I'm conscious I will be done fairly soon, but I just want to highlight a couple of things from this before we move on to the last bit, and then I'll open the floor. Oh, bushcraft, excellent. Baking. And this is the thing, is it's really important we're not judgmental, because I mentioned, and I know I had a smile on my face, ironing. For what some people really love that and they find that really relaxing. That's not the case for me at all. But it's something I hate, but if it's good for you, then great. So it can be anything, absolutely anything. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to do, and you feel free to carry on, you can put whatever you like there and carry on adding to your lists. I'd like you now to, I'd invite you to look at your list, and hopefully you've found 10. And if you haven't, it doesn't matter. But when you look at your list, I'd like you to ask yourself, how often do you do those things? And what I'd say is, if you do those things regularly, brilliant. That's great. Keep that up, because that is about increasing our protective factors. That what we're doing is we're sending signals to our body that we're in a safe place, that we got some enjoyable things, that we can increase our resilience by doing some of those things. If you look at your list and you think, oh, it's been a while since I've done that, okay, that could be a signal that perhaps you need to spend a bit more focused time on those things. So an example for me, oh, hi Emma, is my guitar. I'm terrible, but I really enjoy it. But it's been a long time. When I first ever did this activity, I was like, oh, it's been about 2 years since I picked up a guitar. And now I have one that sits in the corner, and that's something that is there as a reminder. It's something that you can do. You need to make time for it. And I think I'd like to give you a little challenge to take away, is know that there are 168 hours in a week. And try to think about whether you could find and carve out 1 hour a week to be doing one of these things on your list, perhaps, or several of the things on your list, whatever it is. But can you find a way to build in, even if it's 10 minutes a day. However you do it, can we find a way to put that oxygen mask on ourselves and increase that? The second part about the work context is really for you to think about, are there some strategies there? Are there some people I trust? What could I do if I was having a bad day? What would I do? Maybe it's about going out for a walk. Maybe it's about going and getting a coffee. Maybe it is speaking to your manager. Maybe it's taking up some supervision, perhaps asking to speak to occupational health or the employee assistance program or whatever it is. But are there some systems? And if, as you've looked at that, it's very common that that has less things on than maybe your 10, not just because I didn't ask you to write 10 things at work, but it is something to be thinking about. Are there some things that we could do in our work context that might actually help us to do that? And it could even be things like starting a team meeting with the achievements of the week instead of, oh, what needs to be fixed? What can we celebrate that has been great this week? There's all sorts of ways in which we can do that. Now, because I want to make sure you get some time to ask some questions or not, I'd like to just invite you to have a look at your lists, take them away from you, and after today, keep adding to your list of 10 things. It doesn't have to be 10, it can be 20 or 30. And part of the reason for that is, in the moment, if you can't do the thing for whatever reason, so say you're in a stressful situation, and your thing is to go out on your motorbike, and you can't go and do that because you're in the middle of helping someone, there's things that you can, there might be one of the other things that you can do in that moment. It might even be having a moment to think about what it feels like on your motorbike is enough to bring you back into a more resilient place. So that's an invitation in terms of some of the self-care things. As I said, this is about knowing that we can do things for ourselves. A lot of this is probably things that we can help with other people with as well, but it's focusing on us. I'm going to just do one more on this. These are things that we know we're not always good at employing, but these are some of the ways in which we can increase our resilience. And some of these are much more difficult than others, and especially for like defined working hours, saying no, taking time off. Maybe we're not so good at that. I don't know. Maybe you are good at it. I hope you are. It's something I've really had to learn, but there are things that we can do. And I think that's the message I want to leave you with, really, is that there are things we can do ourselves. And of course, we need support from our colleagues, from our friends, from our family, from our organizations, and they have responsibilities to look after us too. It's a two-way process. So one of the other things I'm going to just highlight, in the last 4 years, this is a model that I've come across, that I've now trained in, that I've been seeing used, and I've been using in lots and lots and lots of different organizations. Again, it's very much focused on being a human being. And I just encourage you to go and have a look at it. Again, I can share some links. But what I really like about this model is it's something I wish I'd known many, many years ago. And this is beneficial, not just for the people you might help, but for us as helpers, as volunteers. And I've been training different organizations in this. And this is a model that's been around for around about 15, 16 years. It was set up in California. And it was created by licensed social workers and psychologists who recognise that in all the big disasters, in all the different stressful events, there's never enough psychological support out there. And they were like, what could we do? Is there anything we can use to teach people to help themselves, that can be left with them, that can be given to communities so that they can actually look after themselves when we're not there anymore? And I thought about, when I was thinking about putting together what we're doing today, this is the sort of thing, it doesn't have to be this model. I particularly like this one. I am a little bit excited by it because I think it does a lot more than things like psychological first aid or mental health first aid. It's got a bit of a first aid approach, and it's about helping us reset ourselves in the moment, but it gives us this psychoeducation about how our brains work, how our nervous system works in trauma, and how we can help it, how we can put ourselves in a resilient zone to reset our nervous system and bring it back into balance. And it's really, really useful because you can also use it before you're going into a situation. So you can go in with a resilient space to be able to deal with whatever is going to be there. So it's going to help you to put that oxygen mask on before you go in to help others, as well as being something you can pass on. It's got a lot of evidence behind it. It's grounded in research. It's grounded in the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences research, but it's also grounded in positive childhood experiences research. So looking at what are the resilience factors we can have. And it's got a lot of research behind its use and its efficacy. So one of the things that I just think I'm just going to give you a highlight on, it's actually being used in 80 countries around the world. So it is very applicable regardless of whether you've got the language of trauma. And this is just one example of how this has been being used in Ukraine, where they trained these wellbeing tools to nearly 250 support workers over a period of time who are dealing with and still dealing with the conflict that's happening there. So this is a live situation that's happening. It's ongoing. It continues to be difficult. And some of the people who've been trained in this are saying yes, because one of the things that's important is it doesn't deny that the trauma is happening now. It is happening now, but people are feeling a bit more equipped to be able to deal with that and knowing how it shows up in their body and how they can be of support for themselves and for others. I could give you loads more case studies from this. They've been using it just after the wildfires in Los Angeles, because it's actually where they're based. They've been using it in Nigeria and Uganda and Rwanda. They've been using it in so many different countries with humanitarian workers. I've been using it. I taught some people in Myanmar who are dealing with everything that's going on there at the moment. My colleague has used it after the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. And I've also been using it for people when it's years afterwards. So it's not just for when it's happening. It's also useful for helping people to deal with the impact they're still experiencing many years later in that longer term that I mentioned at the beginning. So the final slide I wanted to share with you is and again, I can give you a link to this particular report. This was something that was done by the women mediators in the Commonwealth recently, where they did some research on people who provide support to war-affected populations. And it was quite interesting the way in which they did the research, but 96% of their respondents reported that their emotional well-being was impacted by what they were doing, but they also acquired professional resilience. So there's some, things that we can look at that, we recognize we can be impacted. We can also, there's a whole new body of study on vicarious resilience, which is really interesting. It's fairly new, so we're looking to see what that tells us. But I think it would be really, it's really good because we don't, we do this, we get a benefit from helping people. I know that the work I've done has made a difference to people, and that's a good feeling. So I think it's something that we can do, but we do need to look at, as supporters, as whether we're volunteers or professionals, how do we look after ourselves? How do we look after our colleagues, as well as the communities that we're serving? And that's me. I was trying to give it enough time for some questions and follow up. Feel free to contact me. I will send a lot of this out through Duncan and Andrew. Really, oh, I'm seeing some people sharing resources on the chat. This is fabulous. But yeah, I hope that was interesting, helpful, useful, all of those things. So back over to you.
Thank you, Jo. Like to be able to talk for 50 minutes is absolutely brilliant. So clearly got so many different aspects to this that you're able to comment on. I see a question in the chat from Patricia from Rio de Janeiro. Patricia, I've activated your camera and your audio, so it's not audio, sorry, your microphone. So if you would like to come off mute and ask your question, then that'd be great. But Jo, thank you so much for that. So many different aspects to it. I've got a range of questions, but I think I'm going to hand over to the questions that are in the chat at the moment. Patricia, are you able to come off mute? Maybe not.
Hi. Can you listen to me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, Patricia. The floor is yours.
I cannot enable my camera. I don't know why. It's not here for me. It said that it is, but it isn't. But okay, got my voice at least. Thank you so much, Jo Dover. I really appreciate your presentation and your job. And so I wrote my question here, and
yeah,
I'm really interested now. I'm a mental health clinician here in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I've done some researches about mental health and well-being of the carers here in Brazil and also in England, in Newcastle. But it was 2015, so I have a gap. Now I'm really interested in relating that to collective trauma. For example, in Brazil, we have racism. I'm a Black woman. So, for example, and when we have most of our population is indigenous or Black. So I would like you to comment something about collective trauma, not about the clients, but about the therapists or the professionals involved. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think we're really starting to, if we'd had more time, I would have gone into a bit more about intergenerational trauma, collective trauma. Trauma is experienced as individuals and as communities. And I think, the cumulative impact of things like colonialism, racism, all sorts of different impacts are there. And the key thing for me is thinking about how that impacts on those of us who help as well. And especially, I think you put in there, it's really important because you are living in those communities. Perhaps you've experienced some of those things as well. Perhaps that's the reason that you get into the professions that you do. I mean, I'm doing some work with researchers at the moment, and I don't think people go into doing PhD research, for example, without caring passionately about the subject, if not having experienced what it is they're studying. So I think it's I think there's a lot of work on collective trauma and impact, and I'm happy to try and share some of that afterwards. Feel free to email me.
I would love.
But I think that collective impact on us as helpers, maybe helpers is too simplistic, but I would include therapists, clinicians. We're living in some really, well, we've always had strange times, but it feels like we're living in some specifically strange times, and they're also impacting us. And we had that amazing pandemic that affected everybody in some way. We had a collective experience in that, even though there's different degrees of it. I don't think we've done enough looking at the helpers in those collective traumas, and especially where those helpers are parts of the community. I'm thinking about perhaps more physical scenarios where, so for example, the work that I was doing with the Myanmar group of humanitarian aid workers and the one where my colleague was working in Turkey and Syria border with the earthquake, the people who are providing the support live there. They've lost their homes. They've had their impacts. They're under threat, for example. So it's unfortunately quite common in lots of areas in the world where the collective trauma is happening to those who are in the helping professions as well. I'm not sure. It's not that it's not happening, but I'm not sure exactly how much research we're doing in that. And I think it's a really important area that we can do. I don't know, Duncan, if you're aware of anything looking at that, or anyone else in the group in the session is, and perhaps you could share some links if you're aware of it.
Well, I'm going to invite Paula Easton to come off mute in a moment, just after Ralph, and maybe Paula could add some richness to that.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Patricia.
Actually, Paula, just while we stay on that theme, because I think Ralph might be taking us off onto a different topic. Paula, I noticed that you've got some resources from the Scottish Government and the National Workforce work that you've been doing. I wonder if you're able to come off mute and perhaps share a little bit about that.
Hi, yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe, for a very interesting presentation. As I say in that comment, it aligns very closely with a lot of the work that we're doing and leading on in Scotland. I don't know if you're aware of the Lifelines project, but it's, you know, as I say, it kind of aligns very closely with what you're talking about and comes from that sort of asset-based approach to looking after people whose role fundamentally involves coming face to face with trauma and people sort of going through a lot of their worst times, and being in that responder. So it's a project that is funded, as I say, by Scottish Government, but also by our partners across Police Scotland, Scottish Ambulance Service, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and the responder community across Scotland. So in terms of that specific question that Patricia was raising, I don't have a lot to add on that. I'm afraid that's not an area of research that we're, or sort of training that we are involved with particularly. But the whole sort of helping people to think about the same thing that you're talking about, Joe. What are the risk and protective factors? What are some of the individual factors? But really, I think we probably all know, because the research shows it time and time again, is that it's organisational factors that have the biggest impact on people's well-being. What we talk about is how these people in these trauma exposed or high risk roles, we can't take away the trauma exposure, but we can do a lot about the organisational factors that are around that. So a lot of our training is in peer support, how to look after your colleagues, how can managers and leaders be creating cultures and environments that help to support people in terms of how they look after themselves, and what to do should people develop some kind of psychological injury. So we have, if people look on our website, we have a little graphic of a waterfall, which is the one that we always go to, which is about, we talk about our journey upstream. So getting away from just pulling people out the bottom of the waterfall in crisis and getting back upstream, seeing what's making people fall in, helping them to build bridges, learn to swim, get in the boats. But we have these interventions both upstream, downriver, and at the bottom of the waterfall, because some people will become injured by the work that they're involved in. And so how do we help them, as you're talking about, Joe, recognise when that is, what they can do about it, and intervene early, rather than wait till people become unwell and those problems become more chronic. So wow. Yeah, it just, as I say, Joe, it just kind of aligns very closely with the work we do. And so those resources are available, although it's funded in Scotland, they're widely available and openly available on the web for people to have a look at. So I would just invite people to do that if they're interested. Thank you.
That's brilliant. I'm going to have a look at it, Paula. I think one of the things I'm seeing a lot of is people are very starting to grasp trauma-informed practice, thinking about it more. It can be harder. And I'd be love to actually talk to you more and find out more about how you did this and how it worked with some of the management, because organisationally, there's a lot of, yes, we'd like to do that and let's find out this. And then when you present with what the reality is, and most of those stress factors are organisational, there's not always the will to change that. So I'd be delighted to hear more about
Yeah.
how that's working, because it can be a tough sell to the sort of senior leadership often.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to follow up on that. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Great, thank you. There's some queries around the trauma mitigation tool, Jo. Are you able to say
Okay.
a little bit more around that?
Yeah. So, what it is the mitigation is I don't even know if I'd call it mitigation. Maybe, I hope I didn't say the word, and then I'm now denying it. What it is we can't stop the trauma, but if we can learn about, there's a lot of work that's been done. The reason I like this particular model is because it brings thoughts and emotions, which we've started to learn how to deal better with our sensations in our body, which is how our brain works. And in our survival networks in our brain, those respond to sensations, which is why things can be activated by a smell or something you hear or something you see or something you touch or something you taste, can bring you back to those sensations. And so when we can learn how to read the sensations in our body, not just the distressing ones, the 6 wellbeing tools that are in there are helping us to learn and read the sensations of well-being in our body. And it's like many things, the more we can learn to recognize that, we can change the response in our body, not completely get rid of the trauma, but we can help. So, for example, our nervous system, often describe it as the accelerator. So all the things that are pumping up in our body, that our heart's beating faster, our breathing's quicker, our circulation's getting everything to our muscles so that we can act. And the parasympathetic nervous system, which is putting the brake on to actually bring us back into balance and know that we're safe and go, okay, that's gone. That fight, flight, and freeze that we have, that responds to sensation. If we can learn how to read a sensation of well-being, we can help our brains and our nervous system to know that we can put the brake on, that we are actually safe in that moment. And there's things that we can do. So I did those 10 things with you. As I said, you might be with somebody and you can't go out on your motorbike or go out for a cycle and it's raining, or whatever it is that you want to do. There are things that you can, even just by thinking about them, you can connect those sensations in your body to bring your body back into balance. So the Trauma Resource Institute is based in California. I think it's the Trauma Resource Institute, traumaresourceinstitute.com. Go and have a look on their website, and sometimes they do webinars. I could do one on it another time if you want, just to give people that insight, if that would be helpful. But you can train in it, and the beauty of it is they have a clinician's version that people can use with clinicians, but they use this in schools, they use this in communities, because this is about helping us to understand where well-being shows up in our body. We've become quite good at knowing, okay, I've got a bit of a twinge in my back, or I'm holding tension in my shoulders, or I've noticed I'm breathing a bit faster at the moment, so I know I'm stressed. What does it feel like in your body to know that you're okay? And how can we tap into that? And that's what I like about it, because it's simple, it's effective. What I found fascinating in the places I've taught it is it's culturally, it works because it's about your body. So you don't need language about trauma or resilience. Those words are professional or jargonistic. Actually, it's about, how do I know I'm safe? How am I feeling? Am I feeling in a place where I can handle things or not? And how can I get myself back into a place where I can handle it again, knowing that my body and my brain will respond these ways when I'm in those trauma, experiencing those trauma activations. And it's for non-clinicians, which is why I love it.
It sounds like what you're saying is that for people who have been affected by a flood and might be anticipating a flood coming in the next couple of years, there's things they can do, not just to prepare their homes, just to prepare themselves, but there's things that they can do to prepare their well-being, and they can do that
Yeah.
starting now
Yeah.
to establish those routines that you've
Exactly.
described. What are
Exactly.
the one or two things that you would say, right, do this, this, and this?
It's different for everyone, so there isn't one or
Yeah.
two things. So the first, so I'll tell you about two of the tools because I think they're things that you can take away. So the first one is learning to track where in your body. Oh, thank you, Alan, for putting that. Andrew for putting that Trauma Resource Institute is tracking. So it's the bit that for me has been missing in that triangle of well-being is tracking those sensations. So I might invite you if you can give me 2 minutes. I might invite you to notice a sensation of well-being. So I'd like to invite you. I know you're the only other one with the camera on, so I don't know if anyone else is doing it, but I'd like to invite you to put your hands out.
Like you
and
have.
then to yeah, and then to bring them together and notice what that feels like. So
I'm looking at the
what's
screen
the
at the moment. I think I'm probably not focusing on the hands.
No, no, just put your hands together. Notice the temperature, how it feels. Does it feel pleasant? Does it feel clammy? It does for me because it's really hot here today. And I'd like to invite you, and those of you, start just rubbing your hands together and notice any sensations. So perhaps it's getting warmer. One of the sensations I notice, I've got 2 rings on, and they're my 2 rings are making a noise as I do that. And then do it faster. What sensations do you notice there? Is it pleasant? Is it neutral? Is it unpleasant? And then just go as fast as you can. Really hot for me right now, and stop.
Yeah.
And notice any other sensations.
Yeah.
So I notice tingling.
Yes.
My hands are getting cooler now. So we're not used to thinking about or noticing that heat, that whether it's smooth, whether that roughness as my rings were hitting against each other, the clamminess. We're not used to focusing on those sensations, and that's part of it. So that's just sort of, there's more that we could do in terms of that tracking. But so when we're trying to look for sensations of well-being in our body, I'll invite you to try another thing, and you don't have to say anything, and the rest of you can write or not. The second one is about resourcing. So think for a moment of something that gives you strength. It can be a person, a place, a memory, an achievement that you had, a personal characteristic that you've got, absolutely anything. And just invite you to notice and really deepen that and think about that moment, that person. What was the temperature like? What was the environment like? Was it indoors or outdoors? Notice some more details. What could you hear around you in that moment, or that with that thing that gives you strength? And when you think about whatever it is that gives you strength, see if you can notice in your body as you think about it, has anything changed? So what do you notice about your breathing? What do you notice about your heart rate, for example? How are your muscles? Oh, actually, my feet just, my arms have just flopped to the side and my shoulders have gone down. I feel a little bit more relaxed as I think about that. And we're starting to notice my shoulders aren't as tight, for example. It might be different for you, might be in a different part of the body. And what we do is focus on that and go, okay, that's really nice. Actually, that's a sensation of well-being. My shoulders feel relaxed. And in the moment of something really terrible happening, noticing a part of your body that feels okay, doesn't have to feel terrific or wonderful. It can just be better than the twinge in the bottom of my back. Actually, my shoulders feel all right. So I'm going to stay with that sensation. And the way that I was able to access that was through thinking about the thing that gave me strength. So
And
it's the second part is not just the 10 things that make you feel great that we did earlier. It's then noticing where does that show up in your body, and the more we can notice, especially in the moment. Okay, I'm not feeling great, but is there somewhere else that feels better than that? How I'm feeling right now. And it's hard to do it for yourself until you practice it. And if you practice it when you're in a good place, you'll become much more used to being able to focus on that and give
I
that
know,
sign to your brain that you're safe. So yeah,
we
so
have
I'm
some
just looking at the
techniques
chats.
represented
Yeah,
today. And
yeah.
I wonder if this is the sort of thing that they can do as a group. You know, as a group of people who are interested in this, and they come together on a seldom basis, but some of these exercises might
So
be something that they
I've
can
been
do. Is there
doing different
anything?
things. There's some really good techniques for children and teenagers. Self-awareness, general situation awareness is really helpful. I'd be happy if you want to talk about it. I'm sort of kind of semi-promising this now with everybody here, but I literally last week did a session with some of the people from the 7-7 community just to give them some insights into the brain science and nervous system. Very, very basic and simple, and then learning some of these techniques, and you have to find your own. You have to find the one that works for you. So there's things like grounding. There's things like so the resourcing can be lots of different things, and you can have several resources, and you can have that one that you're in a meeting and it's really stressful, and you just put your hands on your thighs and notice the warmth and notice the comfort that you get from it, or that the back of your chair is supporting you, and you can do it in seconds and just change your physiology to be able to deal with that stress differently. So we could do something if that's something you'd like to do, but it would need to be longer than 25 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes, whatever. So yeah.
We will be in touch. As the we will absolutely be in touch about that. It sounds great, and I've experienced some of these techniques before, and I think they're always very good for helping you to understand what's going on and how perhaps you can exert a little bit of control over that.
And I think that's the bit for me is I've experienced a lot of these techniques before in just the bit where you think about it, but it's the tracking bit that's different in this particular one, because actually everything else in your body that's unconscious, like you don't have to think how to breathe or how to circulate your blood or how to digest your food. Your body takes care of that. So we need to do some more sort of things that deal with that unconscious, that goes, okay, you can breathe out now. You see people yawning, or the crying is a nervous system release, or oh, okay, that's what that is. Now I know I'm starting to feel a bit better. Yeah.
Well, you've mentioned lots of different things that I hope people will go and follow up on if they choose to, and just different ways of thinking about how do we take care of ourselves, whether we're somebody who's been affected, somebody who's trying to help those being affected, or somebody who's observing what's going on. Sounds like there's lots of different mechanisms there that you've covered. So, thank you so much for your time this evening. You said that there's 168 hours, I think you said 168 hours in the week, and what a really good use of 1.5 hours of those. So thank you very much indeed. And before I close, let me just say to everybody, this is the last webinar of this series. So as I said previously, there were 4 webinars as part of this series of responding to the community groups and the requests that they had back in November, December of last year. All of the webinars that we've done, including Joe's, will be on YouTube. They'll be available through the NCSR website. Hopefully you can see that on here. If you're interested in more about what Joe's got to say, then please do contact her. If you've got interest in NCSR, then please either connect through his LinkedIn, or you can look through our website or check out the RBOC website. So Jo, you've set us up for the evening, both a relaxing evening and hopefully a relaxing evening, going and doing one of these 10 things that is written on my pad of paper. So again,
See
thank
if you
you very
can do
much.
it in a week. You don't have
Do
to
it
do
in a
it
week.
tonight.
Just
Do it in
one
the
a
next
night.
week.
Yeah, one a
Yes,
night.
there will be. I'll send a version that can be shared.
Wonderful
Bernadette.
with the slides.
Yeah, and
Great.
Emma. It was so nice to see your name on here. Emma was part of that timeline of needs back in 2005. So we've known each other 20 years.
Really, and I'm not too far away from Warrington, as you and I talked about before, Jill.
Yes,
so
yes.
yeah, I see Warrington being mentioned, so maybe Emma's local.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much,
you.
everybody. Thank you so much
Good night,
indeed,
everyone.
Jill. Good night, and with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you.